The boardroom was silent. Dozens of eyes waited for the millionaire's command. He was the kind of man who never hesitated, never flinched. Power had hardened him into stone. But in that moment, he couldn't breathe. Across the room, a cleaning cart squeaked against the marble floor. The worker pushing it wore a plain uniform, her hair tied back carelessly. Ordinary. Invisible. Just another shadow in his empire. Until she turned her face toward him. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered. Because standing there, with eyes that mirrored the past he tried to bury, was his daughter. The daughter who had vanished without a trace years ago. No one else seemed to notice. To them she was just a worker. But to him she was a ghost come alive. His pulse raced. His hands trembled. For the first time in decades, the mighty man felt powerless. Was it destiny? A cruel trick of fate? Or the punishment of a god he had mocked for so long? The empire he built on arrogance was about to collapse. And it all began with the face of a woman who should not exist. If this moment gave you chills, stay with me. Because what follows is a story of pride, downfall, and the kind of twist that leaves scars on the soul. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing this community come alive from every corner of the world. And if you believe stories like this carry lessons we all need, hit the like button and subscribe right now. That way you won't miss the next tale where arrogance meets its breaking point. He was a spectacle of control. Every morning, the chauffeur stopped the black car at the precise line of shadow cast by the glass tower. The elevator doors opened without a chime. The receptionist stood without being seen. And the man the city whispered about walked through his empire as if time itself served him. His name, Eduardo Villar, hung on the building like a verdict. Villar Capital. Letters tall enough to be read from the river. People passed beneath them the way believers pass under a cathedral arch, with a quiet mixture of fear and envy. Eduardo liked the silence that followed his footsteps. It meant his rules were working. No small talk. No delays. No mistakes. There was only the rise. The relentless, clean, shining rise. He had earned it, he told himself. He had built it after his own father laughed at his first business plan and called him a dreamer. He had built it after the banks slammed doors in his face. He had built it brick by ruthless brick. And if ruthlessness was the price of greatness, then greatness had been cheap. The boardroom was his theater. High ceilings, cold light, chairs that swallowed anyone who wasn't prepared to fill them. He never sat first. He wanted them to feel the waiting, to taste it. Then he would appear, lay down directives and clipped phrases, and leave before the heat of his coffee cooled. The ritual mattered. Rituals hold buildings together. Rituals keep chaos out. Chaos had a face. He didn't say her name out loud anymore. Names give ghosts a door. The portrait once hung in his penthouse hallway. A girl with laughing eyes, hair caught by the wind on a white pier, sunlight laying a halo over her shoulders. She had been 19 in that picture. She had wanted to study music. She had called it sound architecture, a phrase that made him roll his eyes as if he were allergic to poetry. Life was a boardroom, he told her. Life was a ledger. She could have a piano, of course, but only if it fit inside the schedule. Only if it learned to speak the language of returns. The last night, the argument was small. It began with shoes in the living room. It ended with doors slamming. She left a note that said, "I need air." Then the city swallowed her. Cameras caught her once near a bus terminal. Then nothing. Investigators. Billboards. Donations. Rewards. News anchors leaning into their microphones. Years passed. The portrait came down. Air thickened in rooms where her name was avoided like a superstition. Grief was a mess. Eduardo hated mess. So he manufactured a new truth. The past was a cost of doing business. He never paid twice. In his office, there was a wall of glass that looked over the river and the old warehouses now converted into luxury apartments. He liked to watch the slow barge traffic, the push against the current. It matched his rhythm. He held meetings standing, spine straight, tie just a shade darker than the suit. He fired people with the same tone he used to order lunch. No cruelty. No kindness. Just refusal to carry dead weight. Mercy in his calculus was a coupon. It cheapened the product. Assistants came and went like seasons. They learned not to ask about photographs. They learned not to mention charities that included the words missing or children. They learned to take the long way around any subject that sounded like regret. Regret suggested error. Error suggested weakness. Weakness was contagious. He kept lists, not on paper, in his head. People who owed him. People who failed him. People who could be useful later. He rarely forgot a face. He had built the company by spotting patterns before others did. A tremor in the market. A whisper about a merger. A habit in a competitor's calendar. To him, people were markets that walked. In the mornings, he trained in a private gym. Minimalist. Stainless steel and rubber. He liked the sound of weights returning to racks. The controlled exhale. The need fatigue. He preferred machines to free weights. Machines rewarded precision. They never surprised him. His trainer said, "Perfect form, sir." Eduardo nodded. Form was a religion. He dated. Carefully. Discreetly. Women who understood schedules and didn't ask for afternoons. Photographers never caught him twice with the same person. He told himself this was dignity. He told himself this was focus. What he did not tell himself, because he did not ask himself, was whether he was lonely. Loneliness implies missing. Missing implies absence. He did not admit absence. He compensated. When the city spoke of him, it split in two. Some praised his scholarships. The hospital wing bearing his mother's name. The engineering program he funded at the university. Others despised him in the familiar way the poor despise the rich. Resentful, certain he must have cheated. He ignored both. Approval was inefficient. Disapproval was free advertising. He had taught himself to sleep 6 hours. No more. He had taught himself to drink coffee black. He had taught himself to look at ugly numbers and feel nothing. He had taught himself to stand on graves without noticing the soil. These were skills. They kept a man upright when the floor rolled. On the Monday of the shock, he woke before the alarm. The sky was still bruised with dawn. He watched the river and thought about a deal in Singapore that would give Villar Capital a new stripe on its skin. He liked expansion. It was proof he was still moving forward. He hated the idea of arriving. Arrival means stopping. Stopping means looking back. He had no interest in backward. On the way to the office, the car passed a poster stapled crookedly to a telephone pole. He didn't see it. The chauffeur did. A sun-faded photo of a young woman. Missing, it said in block letters softened by rain. The chauffeur swallowed and looked at the rearview mirror. Eduardo scrolled through a report on his phone and discussed numbers. The car moved on. At the building, the marble lobby trapped footsteps and made them echo. He crossed like a king might cross a courtyard. Heads lowered. Security guards straightened with pride, neither fully chosen nor fully free. In the elevator, he watched the numbers climb. He did not watch his reflection. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled of lemon cleaner. An ordinary note. He barely registered it. He moved to the boardroom, the day's agenda printed in clean headings. Quarterly updates. A real estate acquisition. A restructuring proposal that would cut 200 positions and raise margins by 3%. The arithmetic of victory. He adjusted his cuffs. And then, in the glass of the boardroom wall, he saw himself. But his eyes snagged on a smear at the edge of the reflection. Something moving. A cart. A flash of a face. He turned. The cleaner pushed the cart with the habitual apology of invisible people. She kept her eyes down. She didn't mean to be seen. He was not a man who stared. Staring is a loss of composure. But he stared. Later, when he replayed the moment, he would tell himself he had sensed something before he saw it. A pressure drop. A silence inside the silence. He would tell himself the universe sometimes taps a shoulder just before it lands the blow. But in truth, it was simpler. It was a face. He felt the old hallway return. The portrait. Sunlight on a pier. The sound of a laugh that had once argued with his schedules and won. His throat tightened in a way he associated with sickness. He set his glass down to hide the tremor. It slipped. Shards flashed like tiny verdicts across the polished table. Executives flinched. A few rose half out of their chairs. Eduardo did not look at them. He looked at the worker. At the angle of her jaw. At the precise distance between her eyes. At the way the light caught the brown in her irises and pulled gold from it. Familiar. Intolerably familiar. He told his body to move. He didn't. The woman paused, sensing attention the way animals sense weather. She glanced up. Their eyes met. In hers, there was the open, guarded patience of the poor. In his, there was a cliff. He felt the edge give. "Sir?" someone said. The room wobbled around the word. He raised a hand. Not yet. Not a word more. He looked away because he had to, because drowning men break the surface by force or not at all. He drew air in. Counted to 3. Found the old rails. Ritual. Directives. Control. "Begin," he said, voice steady enough to pass. But it had already begun. Eduardo's voice echoed through the boardroom, steady, precise, calculated. To anyone watching, it seemed like any other morning. But behind his mask, memories stirred like shadows breaking free from walls. The past was not gone. It never had been. It had only been buried, layer after layer, beneath steel and glass and the endless roar of deals that never slept. And now, with one accidental glance at a face too familiar, the earth over that grave was splitting open. He forced his attention back to the charts projected on the screen. Numbers, ratios, market shares, all the clean abstractions that had kept him sane. He leaned on them like crutches. But every percentage, every bar graph blurred into the same memory, the last words he spoke to her. "Music is a toy," he had said, his voice cold enough to turn her shoulders rigid. "You want to waste your life on a stage? Not in this house. Not while my name is yours." She had stood there, trembling, a mixture of rage and despair staining her cheeks. She had wanted him to hear her. Not her words, not even her voice, she had wanted him to hear her heart. But Eduardo's ears were trained for profit, not passion. The silence after her door slammed still echoed in his skull years later. He never admitted it, never confessed it to anyone. He simply let the housekeepers clear her room, let the police run their reports, let the detectives follow false leads, and in the end, let the city itself swallow her whole. He told himself he had tried. He funded the search. He called in favors. He posted rewards. But he had not softened. Not once. Even at her mother's pleading, "Eduardo, please, what if she comes back and finds no warmth here?" He remained stone. Warmth, he argued, did not build legacies. Legacies required spine, not softness. The truth was uglier. He had been afraid. Afraid that if she returned, he would have to face what he had done. Afraid that forgiveness would not come even if begged for. Afraid that the empire he built was nothing more than an armor against the judgment in her eyes. The years dulled the ache but never erased it. He trained himself to stop expecting a phone call in the middle of the night. He trained himself not to see her face in the crowd. He trained himself to live as if she had been erased. And he succeeded, almost. But that morning in the boardroom his training cracked. That worker's face was a key, and it had just unlocked every door he had welded shut. He ended the meeting early. Executives exchanged glances, surprised. Eduardo never shortened discussions, never left the table until his will had been carved into stone. Yet this time, he dismissed them with a flick of his hand. Alone, he walked to the glass wall, his reflection staring back at him. He saw the power, the sharpness, the precision. But behind the mask of control, he also saw the faint outline of a younger man. One who once held a laughing girl on his shoulders, pretending she was flying. A man who had been human before he taught himself to be steel. The knock on his door startled him. It was his assistant, cautious. "Sir, the cleaning staff needs clearance for the upper floors. Should I?" Eduardo waved her off, but his voice caught. "Leave them." The image of the worker lingered. He needed to know. He needed to be sure. Coincidence, he told himself. That was all. Faces repeat. Cities are full of echoes. But doubt is a parasite, and it had already sunk its teeth into him. That night, when the city lights burned like fireflies over the river, Eduardo did something he had not done in years. He opened the drawer where he kept her things. Not many remained, he had ordered most of them removed. But there was one box, small and forgotten. Inside, a photo album his wife had once made, filled with candid snapshots. Birthdays, vacations, small smiles caught when no one was looking. He stopped at one picture. His daughter in her uniform the day she graduated school. She had hated that uniform, but the smile was real. What? Defiant. Beautiful. He traced the outline with his finger. His chest tightened. And then came the memory of the worker's face. That same smile, but older. Hardened by struggle. Yet alive. Unmistakably alive. Eduardo closed the album with trembling hands. For the first time in years, his empire felt fragile. The weight of the past was no longer buried. It had risen, and it was coming for him. Morning bled into noon with the precision of a metronome. Meetings stacked. Calls threaded one into the next. Contracts slid across desks like quiet knives. Eduardo moved through it all with mechanical grace, but inside, the gears slipped. Every corridor became a corridor of mirrors. Every reflective surface a test. He caught himself glancing at the edges of glass, at the glint of stainless steel, at the dark pools of elevator doors, hoping and dreading to find that same face. He lasted until precisely 12:17 p.m. He dismissed the last meeting early with a clipped, "We'll revisit," a sentence no one had ever heard from his lips. His assistant blinked. Eduardo pretended not to notice the fissure in his own ritual. He walked the executive floor with a pace that suggested purpose and not the aimless hunting that gripped him. He knew where the cleaning staff docked their carts when assigned to the upper levels. A service corridor painted the color of obedience. Cameras watched. The hum of ventilation swallowed footsteps. On an ordinary day he would never be here. He had designed his life to avoid places where people's hands grew raw. At the corridor's end, a door stood half open. Inside, a cart with a plastic caddy of sprays, rolled bags, folded cloths. A radio played at a whisper. An old song, the kind that survives in kitchens and buses because it was never expensive enough to die. He stepped in. He touched the rim of a spray bottle. His fingers came away damp with lemon-scented memory. He breathed out, once steady the way he did before a negotiation turned blood-thin. "Can I help you?" He turned. She blocked the doorway with a polite uncertainty, a posture of someone always one step away from apology. Up close, the resemblance was no longer a trick of distance. The shape of the eyes, the stubborn set of the mouth, even the small scar near the right brow. His daughter's scar had been near the left. For 2 terrible heartbeats he wanted the universe to have swapped sides out of pity. "Mr. Villar," she said, recognizing him with the practical shock of a worker seeing the name on the building walk into her corner of it. She straightened instinctively. The uniform, a pale blue that made the city's powerful look away, seemed suddenly to armor her rather than diminish her. "Your name?" he heard himself say. His voice came out too soft, then corrected, "found steel." "What is it?" She hesitated. A glance at the cart, as if the caddy might offer counsel. "Clara, sir. Clara." The syllables hit him like a half-remembered prayer. His daughter's name had not been Clara, but the echo was unkind. He swallowed. "How long have you worked here?" 3 months. She was calm, careful. Her eyes took measure of him the way the poor measure weather. "Will this pass? Will it break me? Should I run?" She didn't run. "I cover floors 30 to 36. Sometimes 40 if they're short-handed." He nodded as if this were a normal conversation he had any right to be in. "I saw you yesterday, in the boardroom corridor." Clara shifted her weight. Not defensive. Just locating an exit in case the wind changed. "I try to stay out of the way. I'm sorry if..." "You didn't do anything wrong," he said too fast. She noticed. People like her always noticed the strain the rich tried to hide. It's how they survived. I needed to ask, whether you've ever..." He stopped. "What? Known a girl who vanished? Woken with someone else's face? Been mistaken for a ghost?" Her expression softened half a degree. "Sir?" He forced his hands behind his back. He needed a script. Scripts saved men from drowning in their own mouths. "You look like someone I once knew," he said, the sentence so flat it felt indecent. A family friend." Clara's gaze flicked across his suit, the watch, the posture that never asked permission. She nodded with a ghost of a smile that carried no joy. "People say that sometimes. Faces repeat, you know? My mom used to joke the factory in heaven only had a few molds." "Your mother is religious?" he asked, reflexively chasing any thread that might lead to origin, to explanation, to meaning. He heard how invasive the question sounded the instant it left him. "Only when rent is due," she said. The line could have been funny if not for the gravity of the room. "Mostly she's tired." He looked at her hands. Not out of sentiment. He wanted evidence. The nails were short, edges darkened by work. A tiny burn mark near the base of the thumb. The flesh told a biography people like him rarely read. He made himself stop staring. "Your full name," he said, and knew he was pushing. "For HR. I may want to, what? Promote her? Relocate her? Investigate her? On the question." She tilted her head, measuring him. Something in her eyes suggested she'd been measured by men with power before and had learned to let the weight pass through her bones. "Clara Mendez, sir." Mendez. A name without weight in his world. He felt ridiculous relief and a colder, deeper confusion. He took a small step closer before remembering that proximity is its own kind of violence. He stopped. "How old are you, Ms. Mendez?" 24. His daughter would have been 25. The arithmetic hurt more than it should have. He nodded as if the numbers could be negotiated. Outside, the elevator chimed. Voices echoed down the service hall. Clara glanced toward them, then back at him. She understood enough about class to know that lingering alone with the man whose name crowned the building could become a problem for her and her supervisor. "I have to finish the floor," she said, not asking permission, not defying him either. Just reclaiming the right to continue. "Of course." He stepped aside. She brushed past, the scent of cheap soap and clean cotton displacing the expensive cologne in the room. He watched the precise economy of her movements. No wasted energy. No pretense. She returned a bottle to the caddy, swapped a cloth, checked the wheel that squeaked and nudged it into a quieter track with the toe of her shoe. He filed away everything as if this were due diligence on an acquisition that would cost him more than money. "Clara," he said, the name unfamiliar in his mouth. She paused. "Do you sing?" Her eyebrows lifted. It was an absurd question in a service corridor. And yet it wasn't. Something in the timbre of her soft "good morning" earlier had rung a tuning fork in his ribs. Or perhaps he wanted the world to rhyme so badly he was forcing a poem onto prose. "Not really," she said. A beat. Then, "My sister does." The word sister dragged a bright hook through his chest. "You have siblings?" "Two. I'm the oldest." The pride in that sentence was small but steady, a candle stubborn against a draft. "We take turns watching each other." He nodded, though the meaning of that sentence lived in a neighborhood he had never visited. He felt foolish in his own building. A trespasser in a place he owned. "If anyone asks," he said, suddenly aware of protocol, of eyes, of rumors, "tell them I was asking about cleanliness schedules on executive floors. There's a project, a confidentiality matter." It was cowardly and it was also survival, for her as much as for him. She regarded him for a heartbeat that felt longer than it was. "I don't talk much," she said quietly. "Not because I'm afraid. Because it wastes mops." The corner of his mouth twitched. It was the closest thing to a laugh he had allowed near his face in months. "Efficient," he said. She inclined her head. "It's the only way to make small pay feel bigger." He stepped back. The conversation had nowhere honest to go from here. He had come seeking certainty and found a person instead. People ruin theories. He watched her push the cart into the corridor. She moved like the city's clockwork, invisible and essential. He stood alone in the room she left, listening to the radio's soft chorus. When he finally returned to his office, the river looked wrong, as if the current had changed direction while he was in the service hall. He called his head of security and heard his own voice from a distance. "I want a background check," he said. "On an employee." Discreetly. No noise. A pause on the line. The measured caution of a man who understood the cost of curiosity. "Name, sir?" He closed his eyes. It felt like speaking a spell that might burn him. "Clara Mendez, cleaning staff. Floors 30 to 36. "Yes, sir." He ended the call and set the phone down carefully, like an object capable of detonation. He knew this was a line. He knew he had crossed it. He also knew he would cross it again before the day was done. Because the impossible encounter hadn't answered anything. It had only widened the question until it was the size of his entire life. Eduardo had never waited well. In his world, waiting was weakness. He was the man who bought answers, cut through silence, and bent time to his will. Yet as the hours crawled forward after that first encounter with Clara, he found himself pacing his penthouse like a prisoner. The background check would take a few days, perhaps less, but to him it already felt unbearable. Every tick of the clock carried the echo of her face, her voice, her eyes. He poured himself a drink. The glass trembled in his hand. He put it down without sipping. For the first time in years, he didn't trust himself. The city stretched outside his windows, restless, glittering, full of lives he could never understand. Somewhere down there, Clara Mendez went home after scrubbing the floors of his empire. He pictured her stepping onto a bus, pushing a grocery bag against her chest, unlocking a door in a neighborhood he had never set foot in. A neighborhood his wealth had probably helped strangle with rising rents. He needed facts. Without facts, his mind spun stories too dangerous to tolerate. So he called his most trusted investigator, not officially tied to the company, but bound to Eduardo by debts so old they no longer needed explanation. "You'll shadow her," Eduardo said. His tone was clipped, businesslike, as if they were talking about a merger, not a woman. "No confrontation. No mistakes. I want to know where she lives, who she sees, how she spends her hours. Everything. And I want it fast." The investigator hesitated, sensing the sharp edge under Eduardo's words. "Understood. But if I may, sir, why a cleaning worker?" Eduardo's silence was answer enough. The man nodded and disappeared into the night. The first report arrived the next morning. Clara lived in a small apartment on the city's southern edge, a neighborhood of cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. She shared the space with her mother and two younger siblings. Rent was late. Utilities threatened to cut off. She took extra shifts whenever she could. Eduardo read each line like scripture. He saw the details of her life written in the plain, cruel language of survival. Paychecks stretched thin. Grocery lists cut short. Shoes worn until soles peeled away. Yet between the investigator's words he sensed something else: dignity. She wasn't broken. She endured. She carried her family on her back the way he once carried empires. Only hers was heavier because it was built on love, not greed. The second report came with photos. Grainy images captured Clara leaving work, carrying a plastic bag of food, guiding her little brother across a busy street, pausing to tie his shoe. Another showed her at a corner store, counting coins with careful fingers. Eduardo's hand froze on that picture. His daughter had once stood in their kitchen, balancing her allowance the same way, making a game of it. "Every cent has a story," she used to say, laughing. The resemblance twisted deeper. That night, Eduardo couldn't sleep. He wandered his penthouse, every polished surface mocking him. He turned on the television only to shut it off after 10 seconds of hollow noise. He opened his laptop, but the spreadsheets blurred, meaningless. All he saw was Clara. Her hands, her eyes. The phantom of his daughter layered over her like a cruel double exposure. The third report detailed her routine: work, home, sometimes late-night shifts at a diner nearby. No scandals, no secrets, just exhaustion and persistence. But then came a note that made his chest tighten. "She hums," the investigator wrote. "Not often. But once, waiting for the bus, I saw her with her headphones broken, no music playing, and she hummed to herself. A melody. Soft, almost like she was afraid of the sound. But steady. Like someone who used to sing." Eduardo dropped the report on the desk. His breath caught. His daughter had sung like that, soft, steady, afraid of being overheard but unable to stop herself. Coincidence, he told himself. Coincidence. And yet his empire of logic and numbers no longer offered safety. The following evening, Eduardo's investigator requested a meeting in person. They sat in a dim cafe far from the city's towers, where Eduardo's face was less likely to be recognized. The investigator leaned forward, voice low. "She's clean, sir. No debts beyond the obvious. No drugs. No records. She works. She goes home. She takes care of her family. That's it." Eduardo narrowed his eyes. "And her past? Before the last 3 years?" The man hesitated. "That's harder. Paper trails are thin. She seems to appear suddenly, as if from nowhere. It's unusual." Eduardo's fingers tapped the table once, twice. He didn't like unusual. Unusual meant chaos, and chaos had the face of a missing daughter. The investigator watched him carefully. "With respect, sir, whoever she looks like, she isn't your daughter. Different name. Different history. You'd be chasing ghosts." Eduardo's gaze turned to the window, where the night pressed its black weight against the glass. "I've been haunted for years," he murmured. "Perhaps it's time to meet the ghost face to face." And with that, he made a decision. He would not be content with shadows and reports. He would see her, speak to her, test the truth with his own hands. Because deep inside, Eduardo feared the greatest cruelty was not that Clara Mendez resembled his daughter. The greatest cruelty might be that she wasn't her at all. He chose the morning. Not because it was kinder, but because morning felt like order. People wore their freshest masks at 8 a.m. The building smelled of coffee and lemon. Schedules were still intact. If he was going to walk into a storm, he wanted it on a clean floor. Clara was on 32. He knew from the rotation sheet he was not supposed to see. She moved down the corridor with her cart, wiping fingerprints from chrome, straightening a row of chairs outside a glass-walled conference room no one liked because it made everyone feel displayed. She worked with the rhythm of someone who has learned to pace her breath to the day. Slow, efficient, unafraid. Eduardo dismissed his assistant with a gesture and stepped into the hall alone. No entourage, no buffer. The air shifted as people noticed. He rarely walked these corridors without an orbit. Today he was a planet without moons. Clara saw him when the reflection gave him away. She didn't startle. She stilled. One hand rested on the cart handle. The other held a cloth that smelled faintly of citrus. She squared herself in that small way the poor do when they refuse to shrink. "Good morning, Mr. Villar." "Miss Mendez." He stopped 3 paces from her. Close enough to speak without raising his voice. Far enough to avoid the accusation of proximity. The rules of class are measured in inches. He had rehearsed a line. A polite question about cleaning protocols. Something that would open the door and keep dignity on both sides. But when he looked at her, the line died. The face rearranged his thoughts. Not a copy. Not a ghost. A person carrying a resemblance like a burden she didn't know he felt. "You missed a spot," he said. It came out colder than he intended. He watched the sentence land. saw the brief, almost invisible tightening at the corner of her mouth, saw the way her shoulders stayed level anyway. She followed his gaze to the glass wall. There was nothing there. The surface was perfect. Where, sir? He hated himself for the next choice and made it anyway. He touched the glass with 2 fingers, left a smear. Here. Clara looked at the mark, looked back at him. Then she lifted the cloth in one slow, deliberate motion and wiped the smear away. No flourish, no apology. Thank you, he said, feeling the poverty of the words in his mouth. That's my job, she replied. Not sharp, not submissive. A simple statement of fact. He nodded. The script he'd reached for, control through small humiliations, felt like a costume he had outgrown and hadn't noticed until it tore at the seams. He tried again. I reviewed your shift logs. He lied because he didn't know how to say I memorized the hours you breathe inside my building. You work late often. Rent is punctual, she said. I try to be also. Do you like it here? She let a beat pass. I like leaving here. That means I get paid. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh if it had the courage. He adjusted his cuff, a nervous tell he despised in others. The corridor hummed with the far-off elevator drum. Office doors opened and closed with soft thuds. They stood in the small pocket of quiet between other people's agendas. Walk with me, he said. It wasn't phrased as a question. He regretted that immediately. Clara's eyes flicked to the camera, then to her cart. She didn't move. I'm on the clock, sir. I'll cover the time. That's not how time works, she said. If I don't finish, someone else does it for me after their shift. Then they miss their bus. Then their kid waits alone 15 minutes longer than they should. She wasn't angry. She was exact. But I can walk while I wipe. He nodded. The compromise dignified them both. He pushed open the conference room door. She followed, steering the cart carefully to keep the squeaky wheel from complaining on the threshold. Inside, the table was long enough to host a treaty. The city lay in squares and arteries beyond the glass. He put both hands on the back of a chair as if it could steady him. Where are you from, Ms. Mendez? Here, she said. And the place before here. And the place before that. A ghost of a smile. We moved a lot. Your father? Absent, she said. No decoration. No venom. She wrung the cloth once and began tracing tiny invisible arcs on the table's edge, polishing what already shone. He left when I was 12, or maybe when I was born. Depends on how you define leaving. He felt the sentence like a verdict he wished belonged to someone else. And your mother? She works. She prays. She gets headaches. She says the saints must be listening because we're still here. You don't believe in saints? I believe in bus schedules, grocery coupons, and people who don't lie to me. She set the cloth down, meeting his gaze openly for the first time. Do you believe in saints, sir? Yes, he said, surprising himself. Or I did. Once. The room exhaled. For a moment the building felt like a church where both of them were out of place and exactly where they needed to be. He almost said her name, the daughter's name, like a confession braced on a table that could take the weight. Instead, he took a breath that trembled and hid it by moving around the chair. Have you ever considered other work? He asked. Reception. Inventory. Something less. He gestured vaguely, failing to find a word that didn't insult the dignity of what she did. Less visible, she offered. Or less invisible? He looked at her. She didn't let him dodge. Less physically demanding, he said carefully. I need hours, not chairs, she said. Chairs come with fewer hours. Hours pay bills. I could. He stopped. Offers are chains if they come from the wrong hands. If there is anything the company can do to support employees on your team. She raised an eyebrow. Like fix the air on 28? The vents blow heat in July. I'll look into it, he said. People have email, she said. No one looked into it. He took out his phone and typed a message to facilities with a priority flag so large it felt like a bribe to his own conscience. He sent it. The phone thudded back into his pocket like a small, satisfied animal. Clara watched without comment. Then softly, why me? He blinked. What? You don't walk these halls to talk to people like me. Yesterday you found me. Today you're here again. Why? The question wasn't suspicion. It was math. Something did not add up. Am I in trouble? No, the word scrape. You remind me of someone. He swallowed. Someone I hurt. Silence. She folded the cloth carefully, aligning corners as if precision could rescue a life. When she spoke, her voice was gentle in a way that could cut. Do you want me to forgive you for what someone else did? He met her eyes and felt something inside him give. No, he said. I don't think forgiveness works like outsourcing. Her mouth flickered. Almost a smile. Almost pity. Good, she said. Because I can't sell what I don't own. He took a step back as if to equalize the pressure in the room. If anyone gives you trouble for this conversation. They won't, she said. People don't see us unless we spill. He stared at the window because the truth in that sentence felt bigger than the skyline. He saw the city bleeding data and invoices, and then he saw the hands that kept the blood moving. He had built an empire on ignoring the hands. I misjudged you, he said, and knew it was both true and insufficient. She lifted her chin. I didn't judge you, she replied. I just read the sign on the building. He almost thanked her for the honesty. He almost apologized. He did neither because apology without action is theater, and he had staged enough. He nodded once. Formal. A truce he didn't deserve. Go on then, he said quietly. Finish your route. She eased the car toward the door. Paused. Without turning, she said, if you want to feel better about the past, fix something in the present. It's cheaper than guilt. Then she pushed into the corridor and was gone, leaving the smell of citrus and the echo of his own breathing. He stood alone in that bright, expensive room while his pride rearranged itself into something that didn't fit the suit. He had come to dominate a conversation and left with an instruction. And for the first time in years he wanted to follow. The days after that confrontation stretched like taut strings. Eduardo walked through his tower as he always had, but the rhythm had changed. Every sound carried an echo now. Every silence dragged up voices he had buried. He told himself he would not seek her out again, yet he caught himself searching for her reflection in the chrome of the elevator doors. His empire ran on discipline, but his mind ran on memory. And memory was disobedient. At night, he returned to the penthouse and sat in the dark. He no longer poured a drink. He didn't need alcohol to feel unsteady. Instead, he listened. Not to music. Never to music. He hadn't since the day she vanished. But the city itself hummed. Sirens, trains, horns, voices spilling from bars. Noise. Human noise. He used to think it beneath him. Now it felt like testimony. One evening, he called an old associate for dinner. A man who had been with him since the early years before the glass tower, before the name Villar Capital made competitors sweat. They met at a restaurant Eduardo once bought out for privacy. The associate ordered wine. Eduardo didn't touch his glass. Do you ever think about her? Eduardo asked suddenly. The man frowned. Who? My daughter. A long pause. The man shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice. Eduardo, that was years ago. People stopped bringing it up because you didn't want it brought up. I want it brought up now, Eduardo said, sharper than he intended. The man sighed. She was like Eduardo. Do you remember? The kind of person who made others feel they belonged. And you? He hesitated. You treated that light like a weakness. I always thought, if she came back, she wouldn't come back to you. She'd go where her light could live. The words stung because they were true. Eduardo nodded, jaw tight. Do you think she hated me? The associate studied him. I think she loved you. And I think you made it impossible for her to show it. Later that week, he visited his sister, one of the few relatives still in the city. She had aged quietly, in a modest home that smelled of herbs and photographs. She looked at him with a kind of wary affection, like someone who had long stopped expecting warmth from him but hadn't extinguished the hope. Why are you here? She asked, handing him tea. I saw someone, Eduardo replied. A girl. She looks like... He trailed off. He didn't need to finish. Her face softened with something between pity and sorrow. You never let yourself grieve, she said. You replaced grief with concrete. But concrete cracks. She looked exactly the same, he murmured. No one looks exactly the same, she said gently. But sometimes God sends reminders, to test whether we've changed. Eduardo shook his head. You sound like mother. And you sound like father, she shot back. Do you remember how he treated us? Steel rules, nothing else? And you swore you'd be different. He winced. The truth had a way of finding him no matter where he turned. At the office, whispers began to circulate. He was distracted in meetings. He interrupted less, stared more. Once, he dismissed a proposal without explanation, then called the executive back an hour later to approve it word for word. Uncharacteristic. Uneasy. The mask of the infallible Eduardo Villar was slipping. Even his chauffeur noticed. Sir, the man ventured one evening, if I may, since you saw that young lady, you've seemed different. Eduardo's eyes met his through the rearview mirror. "Careful," he said softly. "Yes, sir." But the chauffeur had spoken truth. Everyone felt it. His empire had been built on his unshakable certainty. Now, a single worker with a mop had introduced doubt, and doubt spread like cracks through glass. One night, alone in his penthouse, Eduardo opened a drawer he had locked years ago. Inside were old letters his daughter had written him when she was younger. Silly notes, some filled with drawings, others with dreams about traveling, about music, about a life outside the rigid schedules of her father. He read one, dated when she was 13. "I know you don't believe me, but one day I'll sing in front of the whole city. You'll see. You'll finally hear me." His hand shook. The paper trembled like it was alive. Her voice rose in his mind. Not only hers but others too. His wife's quiet pleas. His sister's warnings. The muttered criticisms of employees who thought he couldn't hear. The voices of the past converged, a choir of accusations. And now Clara's voice joined them. Calm, steady. If you want to feel better about the past, fix something in the present. For the first time in years, Eduardo Villar felt surrounded, not by admirers or subordinates but by ghosts. Ghosts wearing faces, voices, and truths he had worked his entire life to silence. And they would not be silenced anymore. Sleep loosened its grip on him. It didn't release. It frayed. He drifted in and out of a shallow dark where voices tangled and lights flickered like failing bulbs. When he woke, he was already tired. When he slept, he was already awake. Doubt had learned his schedule and colonized every spare minute. He told himself he was still in control. He said it out loud once, standing in the shower with the water punishing his skin, as if volume could turn a sentence into a truth. He stepped into his suit like armor and moved through the morning on rails. But rails only help if you know where you're going. He didn't. He only knew where he had been, and even that was starting to blur. He had his investigator widen the net. School records. Hospital records. A paper trail thin enough to show daylight between the lines. Dates that almost matched. Addresses that nearly overlapped. The word nearly began to haunt him. Nearly as a razor. It slices clean without leaving anything to hold. Birth certificate lists a clinic in the South District, the investigator reported. No father on file. Mother, Ana Mendez. The clinic closed 3 years ago. Records burned in a storage unit fire. Convenient, or tragic. Eduardo couldn't tell the difference anymore. He asked for the names of nurses, doctors, anyone still walking around with the past stored in their heads. The investigator found two. One had moved cities. The other remembered a young woman giving birth during a storm. Power outages. Candles. A lullaby hummed to a newborn as rain hammered the roof. The memory was drenched in weather and tenderness, not bureaucratic detail. It offered no proof, only the dangerous intimacy of story. Eduardo prowled his office like a trapped thing. He reread financials and saw none of them. He skipped a quarterly review, something he had never done. The board chairman called, voice tight with diplomacy. "Is everything?" "Everything is fine," Eduardo lied and hung up before the sentence could curdle. He stood at the glass wall and watched the river muscle past. Barges pushed water aside without apology. He remembered teaching his daughter to swim in a private pool that pretended to be a lake. She had laughed when he insisted on straight lines and timed laps. "Water doesn't care about rules," she'd said. "It only cares about rhythm." His phone buzzed. A message from legal flagged in urgent red. A regulatory letter. A review of a merger filing. Questions that needed answers and soon. He stared at it as if it were written in a language he once spoke but no longer remembered. He forwarded it to a deputy with a single word: handle. Delegation is the first stage of collapse when a man makes an idol of control. He told himself he would not go looking for Clara. He went anyway. He timed the elevator for the minutes when the executive floors were quiet. He claimed he was checking renovations. He drifted the halls like a myth people pretended not to see. He caught sight of her twice that week, once crouched by a baseboard removing a scuff with the patience of a surgeon, once laughing with another cleaner, a brief, bright sound that scared him because he wanted to hold it. At night, he opened the old album again. He lifted a photograph and held it against his chest until the edges bent. He took a strand of hair he'd found years ago on her old sweater, cowardice saved in a Ziploc, and he stared at it like a madman who believed objects could answer. Viene. The word arrived like a hammer. Brutal. Simple. Final. He called a private clinic. Money opens doors that ethics try to keep shut. He asked questions in careful code. Was it possible to confirm a biological relationship without the subject's knowledge? The doctor's voice became a vibration of caveats and legalities. He could feel the shape of a yes hiding inside the caution. He ended the call feeling both filthy and relieved. He planned the logistics with the same crisp cruelty he once used on acquisition targets. A water bottle, a coffee cup, a stray hair on a glove. Something touched, something discarded, something taken. His chest tightened as he realized the sentence he was writing for himself. He was about to steal from a woman he couldn't stop thinking resembled the person whose disappearance had hollowed him. He hated himself more efficiently than he had ever hated anyone else. The next morning, facilities thanked him for the priority ticket on the broken air system. The vents on 28th sighed like a convalescent. Word spread among night staff that someone had finally listened. The petty tyrant of temperature was dead. Eduardo walked through the floor and pretended he had always intended to fix it. But when a cleaner caught his eye and nodded once, quiet gratitude, he felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with vents. In the boardroom, a presentation began without him. He arrived late. Eyes flicked. Slides kept turning. The Singapore deal, the one he had chased like a trophy for months, was slipping. The other side sensed weakness and sharpened their smiles. A deputy spoke a number wrong. Eduardo didn't correct him. He was looking at a streak of lemon on the far wall, imagining the hand that had left it. After the meeting, the chairman asked to speak privately. "You're distracted," he said, skipping diplomacy this time. "Competitors smell it. The press is poking again about the old case. Someone must have seen you in the service corridors. Rumors are cheap and multiply fast." Eduardo's jaw hardened. "Handle it." "Not this time," the chairman said softly. "Handle yourself." The words should have enraged him. Instead, they landed like advice from a man who was tired of watching a friend drown in an inch of water. He left the tower early and rode down into the city's throat where buses exhaled diesel and people counted coins with thumb-worn precision. He stood across from a diner where his investigator said Clara took night shifts when the schedule bruised her. He watched. He told himself he was gathering data. He knew he was guarding a door he had no right to approach. She appeared near 10, tying an apron as she walked, hair pulled back, posture squared against the shift. She balanced 3 plates like a juggler and listened with her whole face to an elderly man who needed listening. She laughed once. She scolded a chef gently. She moved, endured, lived. Eduardo walked in. He sat at the counter. He ordered coffee black and didn't drink it. He waited until she noticed him. It didn't take long. Her eyes flared with something like annoyance, then cooled into professionalism. "Coffee okay?" she asked, sweeping crumbs into her hand. "It's fine," he said, and heard the lie in the cup. "You shouldn't be here," she said low. Not fearful. Protective of her space. "This is my other job. I'd like to keep it uncomplicated." "I came to apologize," he said. The room was loud. The words felt fragile. For intruding. For making your work harder. He swallowed. "For seeing something that isn't mine to see." She studied him. "Are you asking for forgiveness?" The sentence was simple. Not a trap. An invitation to clarity. "No," he said. "I'm asking for the chance to do better than sorry." Her mouth softened. "Then do better somewhere I'm not trying to refill sugar." He nodded. He stood. He left money on the counter and hated himself when he realized it was too much. Turned charity by habit. He gathered the bills and left just enough. When he reached the door, he paused. "Would you ever agree to lunch?" The question sounded absurd in the neon of that room. No agenda. Just conversation. She looked at the ceiling as if it could offer advice. "I don't have time for lunches," she said. "And conversations usually come with strings." "I'll cut them," he said. "You can't cut what you're wearing," she replied gently, eyes flicking to the watch, the suit, the gravity that came with his name. "But you can try not to pull." He left without arguing. Outside the cold bit. He stood there and felt the absurd, adolescent urge to be someone else. To trade the watch for calluses. To earn a yes. He walked 2 blocks before he realized he had left the cup on the counter with his fingerprints all over it. The clinic's address burned in his pocket. He stopped. He turned. He stood at the corner and argued with himself. The wind moved trash in circles like thoughts that wouldn't settle. Don't do it. Do it. Don't. He did it. Back inside, he waited until she was buried in orders, then asked another server for a to-go cup. He slipped the used cup into the bag with a movement he had practiced on the rich when he took their companies without making them feel robbed. When he stepped out into the night again, he felt something tear that had nothing to do with conscience and everything to do with the last membrane between him and the abyss. He had crossed from obsession into theft. From grief into trespass. The clinic called 2 days later. The sample had been received. Results in 48 hours. 48 hours climbed onto his chest and sat there. He canceled 2 meetings. He signed a document without reading it and cost the company 7 figures. A deputy reversed it with a flurry of emails and a look of quiet panic. His sister called. He didn't pick up. His ex-wife texted a question mark, which meant I'm worried and also I'm still angry. He sent back a period, which meant I can't. On the second night, he dreamed he was walking through the tower and every mirror returned a different face. His daughter as a child. As a stranger. As Clara. As himself, younger, stupider, lighter. He woke with his fists clenched around sheets damp with sweat. On the morning of the call, he arrived at the office before dawn. He sat in the boardroom with the lights off and the city bleeding toward sunrise. He remembered his daughter's last note, "I need air," and realized he had never learned how to breathe. The phone rang. He answered on the first sound. The doctor's voice was professional, careful, neutral. It contained no mercy. It offered none. "Mr. Villar," the voice said, "we have your result." "Mr. Villar, we have your result." The words sliced the air. Eduardo gripped the edge of the table, fingers whitening against polished wood. The silence between heartbeats stretched until the doctor filled it. "There is no genetic relation. The subject is not your daughter." The words were clean, absolute. They should have brought relief. Instead, they dropped into him like stones into deep water. He didn't breathe. He didn't argue. He simply sat, letting the verdict settle into every hollow of his body. "Mr. Villar, did you hear me?" "Yes," Eduardo said. His voice was level, a performance polished by decades. "Send me the full report." He ended the call before sympathy could creep through the line. He sat in the dim boardroom, the city glowing beyond the glass, and felt the weight of truth crush him. Clara Mendez was not his daughter. She was nothing more than what she had always been, a worker in his building, a young woman carrying her family through storms. The resemblance had been a trick of God or fate, or some cruel cosmic accountant balancing the books. But the truth didn't free him. It chained him. Because he now understood. He had been chasing not a ghost of blood, but the shadow of his own failures. The universe had put Clara in his path not to give him back what he lost, but to show him everything he had destroyed. He left the boardroom and walked through his empire in silence. The polished marble floors reflected his shoes. Executives greeted him with careful smiles, reading his posture, sensing the storm. He didn't return their nods. On the 32nd floor he saw her again. Clara bent over her cart, replacing a trash bag. Ordinary. Exhausted. Alive. She looked up briefly and caught his gaze. For a fraction of a second, her eyes softened as if she saw the heaviness he carried. Then she looked away, back to her work. He wanted to tell her. Wanted to confess everything. The test, the doubt, the theft of her cup, the obsession. He wanted to beg forgiveness. But the words jammed in his throat. To speak them would be to drag her into his pit. She didn't deserve that. She had her own battles, and he had no right to add his shadow to her burden. So he kept walking. That night, Eduardo stood in his penthouse, staring at the city. He poured a drink, then poured it out. He opened the drawer of old photographs again, but this time he didn't take any out. He only looked, then closed it gently. His daughter was gone. Truly gone. Nothing could bring her back. And yet, her face lived on in Clara, not because of blood, but because of a reminder. Of warmth, of resilience, of dignity that refused to bow to power. Eduardo realized he had been offered not a miracle of return, but a mirror of judgment. It was unbearable, and yet it was deserved. The following week, the Singapore deal collapsed. Rivals moved in, circling like wolves. The board demanded explanations. Eduardo gave none. He sat in meetings with his jaw locked, his eyes distant. His deputies whispered about succession, about instability. For the first time in decades, Eduardo Villar looked like a man who could lose. But in the quiet moments, the losses that mattered most weren't financial. They were human. A daughter gone forever. A worker who unknowingly forced him to confront that truth. And a lifetime of arrogance that had left him alone with glass, steel, and silence. The truth had spoken. And Eduardo finally understood. Sometimes the heaviest chains are forged from clarity. Eduardo had never been the kind of man to beg. When something stood in his way, he bought it, broke it, or bent it until it served him. That had been his gospel, and the city had bowed to it for decades. But Clara Mendez was the first presence in years that refused to fit inside his calculations. After the DNA results, he told himself it was over. The answer was final. No connection. No redemption. No miracle. And yet he couldn't let go. The thought of her walking his halls, invisible to everyone but him, gnawed at him. She had become the proof of everything he had squandered, and proof is unbearable when it cannot be erased. So he did the only thing he knew. He tried to buy silence. It was late evening when he approached her again. The floor was nearly empty, executives gone, lights dimmed. Clara was gathering her supplies, hair escaping its tie, her face tired but steady. Eduardo stepped into her path with a folder under his arm. "Miss Mendez," he began. His voice was low, rehearsed, but strained. "I've arranged something. For you and your family." She froze, cautious. "What do you mean?" He opened the folder and laid it on the nearest table. Inside were documents, employment transfers, housing options, financial assistance. At the center, a check with more zeros than she had ever seen. "You don't need to work these hours anymore," he said quickly, as if speed would disguise desperation. "A new apartment, tuition for your siblings, medical care for your mother, and a position here, permanent, secure, with benefits. All you need to do is sign. Walk away from cleaning floors. Walk into a life where you'll never worry again." Her eyes moved from the papers to him. Not wide with gratitude, not lit with awe. Flat, steady, measuring. "You think I want to be bought," she said. "It's not that," he insisted. "It's respect. It's recognition. You deserve more than this." He gestured at the cart, the mop, the uniform. "You remind me of someone I lost. Someone who should have had everything. And I can't lose again, not like that. Please, Clara. Let me give you what you deserve." Her hand hovered over the check, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she closed the folder slowly, pressing it shut with finality. "What I deserve," she said softly, "is not yours to give." He flinched. The word struck deeper than any insult. "You think this job makes me small?" she continued, her voice steady, firm. "You think these hands make me less? But these hands keep my family fed. These hands pay for books. These hands keep us alive. They are not shameful. They are not for sale. And I won't let you turn them into your penance." Eduardo swallowed hard. His throat burned. He had been rejected by rivals, betrayed by partners, outmaneuvered by politicians, but never humiliated like this. Not by a worker. Not by someone the world dismissed as invisible. He tried one last time. "If you walk away from this offer, you'll keep suffering. You'll struggle every day. You'll..." She cut him off. "I already struggle. And I'm still here. Stronger than you think. Stronger, maybe, than you." The silence that followed was heavier than glass and stone. Eduardo felt something collapse inside him. The illusion that money could rewrite history, that wealth could buy dignity, that arrogance could mask guilt. Clara pushed the folder back toward him. "Take it, sir. Keep your empire. I'll keep my life." She walked away, cart squeaking, mop rattling. Her footsteps faded, but the echo stayed. Eduardo sank into a chair, staring at the rejected offer. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of humiliation. Not the humiliation of defeat in business, but the humiliation of a man stripped of the belief that his power could control everything. And in that humiliation, a truth began to carve itself into him. Respect could not be bought. It had to be lived. The night after Clara's rejection, Eduardo returned to his penthouse with the folder still under his arm. He laid it on the dining table, a shrine of failure staring back at him. The check inside might as well have been blank. For the first time, his money had meant nothing. He poured himself a glass of whiskey. He didn't drink it. He simply stared at the amber liquid, the way it trembled with the weight of his hand. He thought of all the nights he had raised a glass to victories, contracts signed, rivals destroyed, towers built higher. Yet tonight, holding that glass felt like holding his own obituary. He set it down and walked to the window. The city pulsed below, endless lights flickering like fragile stars. Somewhere down there, Clara was returning home after another shift, exhausted but unbroken. Somewhere, his daughter's absence still haunted the alleys of memory. And here he stood, a man who had everything and nothing. The next day, Eduardo arrived at his tower early. He walked the floors without an entourage. Workers glanced at him, confused. He noticed for the first time the fingerprints on glass doors, the dust in corners, the hum of machines no one heard but those who cleaned them. His empire was not powered by his ambition. It was held together by invisible hands he had spent a lifetime ignoring. He gathered his board that morning. The men and women who once feared him now leaned forward, hungry to see weakness. He gave them no numbers, no projections. Instead, he spoke with a voice they barely recognized. "This company," he said slowly, has built its fortune on efficiency, on profit, on control. But I've forgotten something. We've all forgotten something. Without respect, all of this is ash. Murmurs, confusion. Some thought he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. But he pressed on. I was wrong to believe money could erase pain. I was wrong to think success excused cruelty. From this day forward, we invest in people. The ones we don't see. The ones who keep us standing. No more invisible workers. A silence followed. Heavy. Disbelieving. But Eduardo didn't care. For once, he wasn't speaking for their approval. He was speaking because the truth had finally forced its way through the cracks in his pride. Weeks passed. Small changes began. Better conditions for staff. Programs for education. Medical support for families. The executives grumbled at costs, but Eduardo didn't flinch. He had learned the hard way that the price of arrogance was far higher. And yet, despite everything, Clara kept her distance. She still pushed her cart, still scrubbed the marble floors, still lived her life with the dignity that had humbled him. She never acknowledged his reforms. She didn't need to. Her rejection had already carved the lesson into him. One evening, as he left the tower, Eduardo passed her in the lobby. Their eyes met. She gave him the smallest of nods. Not approval, not forgiveness, but recognition. Then she walked past, disappearing into the city's tide. For Eduardo, it was enough. He returned home that night and sat before the old album once more. He touched the photographs of his daughter. He whispered her name. For the first time in years, he didn't ask for her return. He simply promised her something. I'll do better now, even if it's too late for you. Tears came then, slow and unfamiliar. He let them fall. The rebirth was not glorious. It was not triumphant. It was painful, humiliating, and raw. But in that pain, Eduardo finally understood what power had blinded him to all along. Respect was not earned through fear, not bought with wealth, not forged in arrogance. Respect was lived day by day in how one chose to see others. And for the first time in his life, Eduardo Villar chose to see. If this story struck something deep inside you, let it stay with you. Power fades. Wealth crumbles. But dignity endures. Eduardo learned too late that respect cannot be bought. And maybe that is the lesson we all need to remember today. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen arrogance collapse under its own weight? I want to hear your stories. And if you believe more people need to hear tales like this, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video. Because respect is priceless. And the more we remind each other of that truth, the stronger we all become.